Stop lying. Your father is not a Navy SEAL, and I won't tolerate made-up stories in my classroom." The words cut through the fluorescent hum of the science lab like glass breaking. Chairs stilled. A beaker clinked against the counter. Somewhere in the back, one of the boys tried not to laugh, a snort turning into a cough that echoed too loud in the silence. The new girl stood frozen near the lab table, long blonde hair brushing her shoulders, white shirt tucked neatly into a red plaid skirt. Her hand rose slowly to her mouth, like she was trying to push the words back in time, trying to unsay whatever had somehow turned into an offense. Her eyes were wide, stunned, embarrassed, and suddenly very, very alone. Behind her, the American flag on the wall didn't move. The periodic table hung rigid and silent. The three boys in black varsity jackets, bold white B stitched over their chests, nudged each other like this was entertainment. They didn't even bother pretending it wasn't. "I didn't lie," she whispered. "I was just answering your question." The teacher crossed her arms. "Your answer was disrespectful. This class is about truth and responsibility, not fantasy. Sit down." A microscope sat inches from the girl's hand. A thin smear of fingerprints glistened on the metal. She looked at the seat she'd been assigned, middle of the room, nowhere to hide, then at the boys, already smirking like they'd won something. Inside her chest, a small voice trembled. "Why does it always happen like this?" And then, footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, measured, accompanied by the faint jingle of a dog's harness. The door handle turned. Before this story goes any further, take a second to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. The door began to swing open, light from the hallway slicing across the floor, and every set of eyes in the room followed it, even the ones that pretended not to care. Something was about to happen. Something that would either save her or make everything worse. And the girl, the one everyone had silently decided wasn't worth believing, stood perfectly still, trying not to breathe, trying not to hope, wondering how you survive in a world that punishes you for telling the truth. The morning had started ordinary. That was the part that would later haunt her. How normal it all felt at first, as if the universe had decided to slip the worst day of her life into a plain, unremarkable Tuesday. The high school's front steps buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the usual half-awake shuffling of students who'd rather be anywhere else. She clutched her backpack strap, fingers white, and told herself to blend in. New school, new chance, don't stand out. Her name was whispered here and there. Someone had heard she transferred mid-semester. Someone else said her family moved because of something with the dad, and like every rumor, it grew legs and jogged in circles. She kept walking, eyes low. Her long blonde hair shifted with each step, brushing against the collar of her white shirt. The red plaid skirt, part of the optional Heritage Week dress theme she hadn't realized no one else wore, made her feel like she'd accidentally dressed for a different world. Inside the building, the hallway walls were lined with trophies and faded class photos. It smelled like floor wax, cheap sanitizer, and the faint sweet tang of cafeteria cinnamon rolls. Kids moved in packs, nobody moved with her. When she reached the science lab, she paused. On the other side of the door, voices bounced around like loose marbles. She inhaled, squared her shoulders, and stepped in. The room was bright, long tables, rows of microscopes, beakers stacked neatly beside sinks, posters showing atoms and ecosystems. The American flag took up half the wall beside the whiteboard, and beneath it sat the teacher, mid-40s, composed, the kind of precise posture that said rules mattered. "The name on the board, Mrs. Keller." "Take any open seat," Mrs. Keller said without looking up. Three boys near the back glanced her direction, black varsity jackets, the letter B stitched proud. One leaned over to the other, a low whisper, a grin. She walked past them, feeling the heat of their eyes like lights turned on too bright. She chose the middle, safest, she thought, not too close, not too far. Class began the way classes do, roll call, syllabus reminders, lab safety speech. Mrs. Keller's voice was careful and deliberate. She treated every sentence like a formula. But beneath that there was something. A thin thread of impatience, maybe, or the sense that she expected to be challenged and was tired of it before it happened. The first spark came easy. "We're starting our unit on ecosystem," she said, "and I want to connect it to real-world responsibility. Who here has someone in their family who serves, military, first responders, anything like that?" Hands went up around the room. A few students shared: firefighter, nurse, older cousin in the Marines. With each answer, Mrs. Keller nodded with polite approval. The girl hesitated, then slowly, carefully, she raised her hand. "Yes?" the teacher asked. "My dad," she said. "He's—" She didn't get the rest out. "Let me guess," one of the varsity boys muttered. "He's like some super spy or something." Laughter, not loud, just sharp enough to draw blood. She swallowed. "He's a Navy SEAL." The room shifted. A few eyebrows lifted. Another boy gave a soft, mocking whistle, like someone had just bragged about owning a rocket ship. Mrs. Keller's eyes cooled. "That is a significant claim." "It's not a claim," the girl said. It's true." Silence stretched, taut and brittle. The teacher folded her arms. "Listen," Mrs. Keller said, voice flattening, "I appreciate participation. But exaggerating or inventing stories is not appropriate. It undermines trust in this classroom. We deal in facts." Heat crawled up the girl's neck. She felt the stares, the curiosity, the disbelief, the hidden delight from the boys in black jackets who seemed to feed on moments like this. "I wasn't exaggerating," she said quietly. "You asked about family who serve," I answered. "I didn't mean—" "You meant to impress," Mrs. Keller replied. "And you miscalculated. Sit down."
Something in the teacher's tone made it feel final, like a gavel instead of a correction. The girl's throat tightened. She lowered herself back into the seat, heartbeat pounding in her ears. The boys smirked, tapping the B stitched onto their jackets as though it stood for better. One leaned forward and whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "Sure, SEAL girl. Maybe next week he fights aliens too." She wanted to disappear. Instead, she stared at the microscope in front of her, its lens blurred with faint smudges. If she focused hard enough, maybe time would slide forward, the class would end, and this humiliation would dissolve into the general fog of school memory. But it didn't. It stayed. It grew. Every question after that felt like a trap. Every glance from the teacher carried suspicion. When Mrs. Keller asked the class to pair up, the partners beside the girls subtly shifted their chairs away, leaving just enough space to make it obvious without getting in trouble for it. Midway through the period, the lab room door cracked open. Someone from the office delivered a stack of forms. Mrs. Keller thanked them and started sorting, one eyebrow slowly lifting as she scanned the names. "We have a new student with incomplete file information," she said. "Make sure, whoever this belongs to, that you bring the correct documentation tomorrow. I don't want surprises." The paper in her hand bore the girl's last name. Heads turned again. The girl sank lower into her seat, and that's when she felt it, a flicker of anger beneath the embarrassment. Not big, not loud, just enough to remind her of something her dad used to say when she was younger: stand straight, even when people want you small. She sat up an inch. Mrs. Keller noticed, and for a heartbeat their eyes locked. A teacher convinced she'd caught a liar. A girl certain she'd just been condemned for telling the truth. Two versions of reality colliding in a space that had no room for both. The bell finally rang. Relief broke across the room like air released from a balloon. As she packed up, one of the varsity boys bumped her shoulder. Not hard enough to cause a scene, just enough to signal possession of the space. "Later, SEAL girl," he murmured. She didn't reply. She walked out, but the moment clung to her like a shadow, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it had only just begun. Lunch was supposed to be a break, a place where the rules softened and everyone drifted into their corners. At this school, it was another arena. Noise ricocheted off the tiled walls, trays clattered.
A basketball thudded against the far wall from the gym next door, each echo matching the restless rhythm in her chest. She scanned the cafeteria for an empty table. Most seats were taken by groups that had clearly existed long before she arrived. Athletes, theater kids, quiet clusters of friends leaning in close. The bullies in the black varsity jackets sat near the center, strategically placed like they'd claimed territory. The giant white B stitched over their hearts almost felt like a brand. She found a corner table and sat alone. She opened her lunch slowly, pretending she didn't notice the glances. She'd learned long ago that pretending helped, not with them, but with herself. From across the room, she could feel the boys watching. "Who wears that skirt to public school?" one said, not bothering to lower his voice. "She thinks it's some kind of private academy?" Another laughed. "Nah, she's probably playing the innocent card, get sympathy points, and the Navy SEAL dad story?" "Please." She stared at her sandwich. The bread tasted like cardboard. Her hand trembled every time she lifted it. Somewhere deep down, anger and humiliation fought to decide which would stay longer. Memories rose, not the bad ones but the ones she missed. Her dad teaching her how to tie knots with patience that surprised her. Early morning runs where he spoke softly about discipline, resilience, respect. He didn't talk about missions. He didn't brag. In fact, he rarely said anything about the Navy at all. But the quiet, thoughtful strength was always there, like gravity. He always listened when she talked. And here she was, in a cafeteria full of voices, suddenly erased by a rumor she hadn't even started. The chair across from her scraped the floor. She looked up. One of the varsity boys, the tallest, with dark hair and an expression that balanced boredom and cruelty, sat down uninvited. His jacket creaked slightly when he leaned forward, elbows on the table. "So," he said casually, "what's it like being famous?" She blinked. "I'm not right, he interrupted. "Daughter of a Navy SEAL. Must be pretty epic. You guys probably move around a lot. Secret bases. Special training. Maybe that's why you came here." His tone wrapped fake curiosity around sharp mockery. The other two boys watched from their seats, grinning like they'd sent their spokesperson. She didn't answer. He leaned closer. "You know the thing about lies, they spread quick. Especially when they're fun, people love a good story." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't lie." He smiled, not friendly, not even cruel exactly. More like someone who'd found a puzzle they enjoyed taking apart. "See, here's the problem. Mrs. Keller doesn't like liars, and she runs the science club and the scholarship committee, and most teachers listen to her. That's kind of a big obstacle for a new girl." He shrugged like it was out of his hands, then stood. "But hey, maybe your dad can parachute in and fix it, right?" He returned to his table. The others congratulated him quietly, tapping fists and laughing. She sat frozen, muscles buzzing with the urge to run, but where? One wrong move and she'd become the punchline forever. One burst of anger and she'd prove every stereotype they secretly pinned to her. The bell saved her again. Afternoon classes bled together. Everywhere she went, whispers brushed past. SEAL girl, liar, drama queen. She tried to focus on the words the teachers said, but every sentence bent around the single humiliation from that morning. By last period, she was exhausted. Not from work, but from holding herself together. And it had to be science again. She slid into her seat. The lab smelled slightly of bleach now. The American flag hung heavy, catching no breeze. Outside the window, the sky had shifted toward late afternoon gold. Mrs. Keller stood at the front, clipboard in hand. "Today," she said, "we're talking about credibility. In science, if your data is unreliable, everything falls apart. When someone is dishonest, it affects the entire system." Eyes flickered her way. Not all, but enough. The girl felt the words press against her like invisible hands. Mrs. Keller continued, "Integrity is not optional. Once trust is broken, it is very difficult to repair." A hand shot up, one of the varsity boys. "So like if someone lies one time, nobody should believe anything they say after that?" Mrs. Keller nodded slowly. "That can often be the case, yes. The girl's heart thudded harder. The message was clear even without names. When the bell rang, Mrs. Keller called out, "You, stay a minute." The class emptied. The room grew quiet. The girl walked to the desk. "You need to understand," Mrs. Keller said, her voice softer but no warmer. "This school has had issues with students exaggerating backgrounds to get attention. If you truly have a parent serving, there will be records. Until then, I expect no more stories. Focus on the work." The girl swallowed. "My dad's not a story." "Then bring documentation," Mrs. Keller replied. The girl left the room feeling smaller than when she entered, as if every hallway had shrunk. Outside the classroom, something new waited, a faint echo of boots, the low murmur of a man's voice, a dog shifting its weight near the office. She slowed. At the far end of the corridor, an officer stood, broad-shouldered, uniform crisp, a German shepherd sitting obediently at his side. The dog's ears were alert. The officer spoke quietly with the principal, gestures measured, like everything about him obeyed an internal order. Students glanced, whispered, then moved on. Authority at school was nothing new, but to her the sight twisted something inside. Not fear, not relief, something complicated like a warning wrapped in familiarity. She walked past, eyes down, praying he wouldn't notice, praying he would, unsure which terrified her more. He didn't speak. The dog watched her, head tilting slightly, then settling again. She stepped outside into the afternoon air, a knot tightening in her chest. The injustice stung, the ridicule lingered, and somewhere beneath all of it lived a question that felt heavier by the minute. How do you prove the truth in a place that has already decided you're lying? She didn't know yet that the hallway, the officer, the silence, all of it was just a prelude. That soon the door of that science lab would open in a way no one expected, that the line between authority and compassion, rumor and reality, would bend so sharply the whole school would feel it. The next morning, the sky looked washed out, like someone had wrung the color from it. She stared at herself in the mirror longer than usual. Same blonde hair, same white shirt, same red plaid skirt. A girl who felt like the whole building had already made up its mind about her. She considered changing, something quieter, something invisible. Then she remembered the tiny inch she had lifted her chin the day before. Stand straight, even when people want you small. She kept the outfit. School hallways have their own weather. Today, it felt colder. Conversations hushed as she passed. Not out of cruelty alone. Sometimes just curiosity pretending not to be cruel. Kids like to observe without actually stepping in. It's easier. In the science lab, the fluorescent lights buzzed the same way. Microscopes lined up like patient observers. A beaker at the front steamed slightly, condensation crawling up the glass. The American flag hung still, watching. She sat. Nobody joined her table. Mrs. Keller started class briskly. "We're moving into controlled experiments today. Cause and effect. What we think is happening versus what's actually happening." Her tone landed heavier than usual. They were assigned to test plant growth under different light conditions. Simple in theory, but experiments have a way of revealing more than they're supposed to. The girl worked quietly, measuring soil, recording starting heights. She was careful, precise. Her father had taught her that details weren't just kids like to observe without actually stepping in. It's easier. In the science lab, the fluorescent lights buzzed the same way. Microscopes lined up like patient observers. A beaker at the front steamed slightly, condensation crawling up the glass. The American flag hung still, watching. She sat. Nobody joined her table. Mrs. Keller started class briskly. "We're moving into controlled experiments today. Cause and effect. What we think is happening versus what's actually happening." Her tone landed heavier than usual. They were assigned to test plant growth under different light conditions. Simple in theory, but experiments have a way of revealing more than they're supposed to. The girl worked quietly, measuring soil, recording starting heights. She was careful, precise. Her father had taught her that details weren't just technical. They were a way of respecting the work. The varsity boys weren't as careful. They whispered, laughed. One casually switched labels on 2 pots, another wrote down numbers before measuring, because it'll be close enough. At one point she saw it, hesitated, then glanced at the clock. They'd already noticed her noticing. "What?" one said, eyebrows raised. "You gonna report us?" She shook her head and went back to her own plants. Something important happened inside her in that moment. Not dramatic, not loud, just clarity. She realized how easily falsehood spreads, not because people lack the truth, but because the truth feels inconvenient. And she realized why Mrs. Keller cared so much about honesty in science. She just wished the teacher cared that much about honesty with people. When it came time to compare results, the boys' numbers looked incredible. Too incredible. Their plants had supposedly grown at impossible rates overnight. Mrs. Keller's eyebrows rose. "Interesting," she said. "Explain your process." The boys filled the space with confident words. They sounded sure, they sounded impressive, they sounded believable, and that was the terrifying thing. The girl looked at her modest, accurate numbers. They didn't sparkle, they didn't impress, they just told the truth. Mrs. Keller scanned the sheets. "This," she said, holding up the boys' chart, "is either a mistake or dishonest. Science does not reward theatrics." Their faces hardened, pride bruised. Then her eyes shifted toward the girl. "And this," she said, lifting the girl's paper, "is cautious work. Not flashy. Consistent." The words should have felt like validation. Instead, they arrived coated with irony. The teacher trusted her numbers, just not her as a human. The boys exchanged a look, resentment brewing. After class, as everyone filed out, one of them shoulder-checked her harder than before. "Hope you enjoyed the gold star," he muttered. "Teacher's pet and a liar, nice combo." Her heart hammered, but she kept walking. In the hallway, one small moment of unexpected value unfolded. A girl from another class slowed her steps beside her, not smiling, not offering to be friends, just saying quietly, "I thought your experiment was good." Then she walked off. The words were small, maybe forgettable, but to someone carrying 100 quiet wounds, they felt like stitches. The girl tucked them away like a fragile treasure. At home that afternoon, dinner was quiet. Her dad wasn't there, deployment didn't come with predictable schedules. Her mom stirred pasta absently, trying not to stare too long at the empty seat. "How was school?" her mom asked gently. It would have been easy to say fine, safer maybe, but something in the girl cracked open. "They think I'm lying about him," she said softly. "My teacher, those boys, everyone." Her mom went still, then exhaled slowly. People fear what they don't understand, and sometimes they punish truth because it makes them feel small. The girl wiped at her eyes, surprised by the tears. "I don't want to be a problem." "You're not," her mom said. "You're just visible." That sentence lingered. Before bed, the girl sat at her window watching the neighborhood grow quiet. A thought grew inside her, uncomfortable but meaningful. Maybe this wasn't just about being believed. Maybe it was about learning who people became when belief required courage, and maybe she was learning who she was becoming too. By the end of the week, tension had sunk so deep into the school it felt like another layer of paint. Conversations carried traces of it. Eyes lingered longer. The varsity boys had started a quiet campaign, not loud lies, just casual remarks designed to hollow her out from the inside. "She always looks like she's about to cry. Bet the seal dad thing is just for attention. Teachers only like her because she acts perfect." They said these things where she could almost hear them, that careful cruelty teens learn too early. Inside the science lab, Mrs. Keller launched a new lesson, critical thinking and bias. The timing could not have been more ironic. She wrote on the board, What we expect can distort what we see. The girl watched, feeling the words sink into something tender inside her. Mrs. Keller continued, "When we assume someone's motives, we stop listening to their reality. Good scientists fight bias. Good people do too." The class shifted, some uncomfortably. For the first time, the girl sensed something uneasy flicker in the teacher's expression, like a crack of self-awareness, small and fleeting. It didn't erase anything, but it mattered. They transitioned into a lab exercise about observation. Students were given sealed envelopes containing short case studies about supposed events. Their task: identify where assumptions replaced facts. The girl opened hers. The scenario described a student accused of stealing because they had a history of trouble. No proof, just reputation. The prompt asked, "What did the adults miss?" Her chest tightened. She wrote carefully. They missed curiosity. They missed asking. They missed the possibility that the story might be different this time. When Mrs. Keller walked by, she paused, reading. Her lips parted slightly, as if something clicked into place she wasn't ready to acknowledge yet. Across the room, the varsity boys grew restless. Reflection exercises didn't give them power. They thrived in unstructured chaos, not situations where they might have to confront their own role in someone else's pain. After class, the boys cornered her near the lockers. "Hey," one said, "word is Mrs. Keller's going to call about your records. Maybe the truth will come out." He said truth like it was a threat. Another leaned in. "What happens when your big story falls apart? You gonna cry again?" Her throat ached, but instead of shrinking, she did something unexpected, even to herself. She looked at them, really looked, and with steady, quiet honesty said, "If everything you needed other people to believe about me disappeared, what would you have left to hide behind?" They blinked. Not a comeback. Not a raised voice. Just a mirror they hadn't asked for. The tallest one scoffed and walked away, but something unsettled lingered in his expression. That night her mom received a call. Office number, calm voice, formal phrasing. "We're just clarifying some records." Nothing accusatory. Nothing kind either, just procedure. Her mom hung up with a sigh. "They'll see the truth soon." The girl nodded, but inside fear curled tight. Not fear that they'd discover she lied. Fear that even after the truth came, the damage would stay. Because humiliation doesn't evaporate when corrected. It lingers in memory, in the way someone flinches around certain rooms. The next day, the officer returned to the school. He walked the halls with quiet purpose, dog at his side. Students stepped out of the way, curious. Some assumed there must be trouble. Some simply stared at the German shepherd, powerful, disciplined, almost majestic. The girl passed him again, this time closer. The dog's ears twitched. The officer glanced at her, eyes calm but unreadable. Not judgmental, not congratulatory, simply observing. She wondered what he saw when he looked at students like her. Vulnerability, defiance, confusion, all of it maybe. In science class that afternoon, the tension finally cracked. Mrs. Keller opened with a simple sentence. "I owe someone in this room something important." The noise dropped instantly. Even the boys went still. She didn't look at the girl directly yet. Instead, she spoke to the class at large. "Yesterday I talked about bias. I realized I modeled some myself. I made an assumption before verifying facts. That's not what I teach, and it's not who I want to be." The words felt heavy, uncertain, like stepping into vulnerability was new for her. Then she met the girl's eyes. "I'm sorry." The class shifted, some surprised, some uncomfortable. The varsity boys' smirks faltered. The apology didn't magically erase everything, but it mattered. It acknowledged something that needed acknowledging. The girl swallowed. A tiny, barely audible whisper inside her said, "People can change when they choose honesty over pride." That lesson, quiet, fragile, was worth something. But the boys didn't see value there. They saw threat, power shifting, attention turning. By the end of class, they were whispering again. Not jokes this time, but strategy. If the teacher wasn't going to keep the imbalance in their favor, they'd find another way. Without realizing it, the girl stood at the edge of a breaking point she couldn't yet see. Because apologies can mend, yes, but they can also expose the kind of people who refuse to grow once the rules stop benefiting them. And somewhere in the space between truth and pride, a storm was quietly forming. One that would carry everyone back into that science lab at exactly the wrong moment. For now, she walked home alone, trying to hold together the parts of herself the day had tried so hard to scatter. Word traveled fast, faster than truth and louder than apologies. By Monday, the story had splintered into versions she barely recognized. Some students whispered that the teacher had apologized because the administration forced her. Others claimed the new girl played victim so well that adults fell over themselves to protect her. And the varsity boys, careful calculating, didn't argue. They let the rumors work for them. In the science lab, the air carried something brittle, not outright hostility, something subtler, like everyone had begun rehearsing a role and didn't want to forget their lines. Mrs. Keller moved carefully too, not out of guilt alone, but responsibility. She assigned a new unit, ethical choices in science, real-world cases of mistakes, cover-ups, and how one decision could ripple outward to affect lives. This unit matters, she said quietly, because integrity isn't tested in easy moments. It's revealed when the pressure builds. Those words hit the girl harder than she expected. Pressure had become her normal. Their main assignment was a group project. Each team would study a historical case, analyze the ethical failure, and present how the situation should have been handled. Names appeared on the board. Her stomach sank. She'd been paired with the very boys who had made school feel like a tightrope. A murmur cut through the class. The boys exchanged delighted glances, not loud celebration, but the kind of smile you wear when the game tilts in your favor. The tallest one leaned back, arms crossed. "Guess we're teammates now," he said lightly. "Try not to lie on the presentation." Mrs. Keller pretended not to hear, but her jaw tightened. After class, the girl lingered. "Did you do that on purpose?" she finally asked. Mrs. Keller hesitated, then nodded.
"Yes, not to punish you, to challenge them. And you. Sometimes conflict becomes less destructive when it has to face accountability head-on."
The girl understood the logic. She also understood the risk. Group work meant dependency. Dependency meant vulnerability. They met after school in the lab to start their project. The boys slid into chairs like kings taking their thrones. One spun a pen between his fingers. "Okay," he said, "here's how we're doing this. We pick something simple, everyone writes 2 slides, we're done. Nobody needs to overthink it." She opened her notebook. "The assignment isn't just slides, it's analysis." "Same thing," he shrugged. "It isn't," she said softly. "We're supposed to explain the moral pressure, why the bad choices seemed easier." They exchanged tired looks, the universal expression of people annoyed that effort was required. "Fine," another boy sighed. "What case are we even choosing?" She suggested one about a company falsifying test results, leading to dangerous products going to market. The case raised questions about fear, ambition, responsibility, everything they were supposed to explore. The boys wanted something flashier. "Let's do the lab explosion one argued. "It's cooler." She exhaled. "The explosion story focuses on tragedy. This project is about decisions, why people ignored the warnings, why nobody spoke up. That part is important." The room went quiet, not angry, just stubborn. Then the tallest one looked at her thoughtfully, almost curious despite himself. "Why do you care so much?" he asked. It wasn't asked cruelly, it sounded genuine, and the honesty of it surprised her. She took a breath. "'Cause my dad always says the quiet choices matter most. The ones no one claps for, they're the ones that change things." They absorbed the sentence differently. One boy rolled his eyes, another looked away. But that tallest one, he seemed to hold it, if only for a moment. Eventually they agreed, reluctantly, to do the case she suggested. As they divided roles, something meaningful surfaced beneath the tension. They discovered she was good at making complex ideas understandable. One of the boys realized he was strong at visuals. Another, the one who always joked, turned out to be good at framing arguments when he actually tried. It didn't erase everything between them, but it shook the idea that any of them were one-dimensional. Halfway through the meeting, the officer passed the lab windows, German Shepherd pacing at his side. He paused briefly, glancing in. Not intrusive, just aware. The dog's eyes, alert but gentle, tracked movement like it understood more than anyone gave it credit for. For a split second, the girl felt something she hadn't felt in a while. Steadiness. Not safety handed to her. Steadiness she was building. As the boys packed up, one muttered to the others, "This project better be worth it." The girl gathered her notebook. In her chest, something shifted. Maybe value isn't found only in being believed. Maybe it's also found in becoming someone who refuses to let bitterness decide who they are. That night, as she reviewed her notes, she realized the ethical cases mirrored real life more than anyone liked to admit. Lies didn't start in grand dramatic gestures. They started small, with cowardice, insecurity, ego, with people afraid to lose their place, and she wondered, quietly, if the boys' cruelty came from that same fear. The thought didn't excuse them, but it complicated them. And that complexity was the beginning of compassion, not the soft kind that lets people walk over you, but the brave kind that lets you see clearly while still holding your ground. She didn't know it yet, but understanding people, really understanding them, was going to matter more than anything.